Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're taking a deep dive into the career and controversies of Matt Gaetz. As you know, President-elect Trump recently nominated him for Attorney General. You've sent us quite a bit, articles, biographical info, so let's try to untangle this pretty polarizing figure.
Yeah, absolutely. We really want to paint a clear picture of Gaetz, starting from his Florida roots and how he ended up in the national spotlight.
Exactly, and of course we'll look at his political career, from the beginning. His policies, what he stands for, and of course all those incidents that have kept him, well, let's just say in the headlines.
So I think a good place to start is with his background. Gaetz comes from a pretty politically influential family in Florida. His father, Don Gaetz, was in the Florida State Senate. He even served as Senate president.
Right, so politics was, I guess you could say, in his blood. Gaetz followed that path pretty early on, going into politics himself. He won a seat in the Florida House of Representatives back in 2010.
And he didn't waste any time. He quickly became known as a strong conservative, pushing for things like gun rights, tax cuts, and even changes to the criminal justice system.
And then in 2016, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives for Florida's 1st District. And that's when he really became a vocal supporter of Donald Trump, aligning himself, quite closely with Trump's agenda.
His committee assignments on the House Armed Services and Judiciary committees gave him the platform to, champion a lot of those policies.
Right, okay. So let's move on to his actual policy positions.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he has this kind of libertarian-leaning conservatism, but he also has some positions that, well, you wouldn't quite expect.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. He's definitely a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and he prefers, a non-interventionist foreign policy. But then, at the same time, he's come out in support of certain criminal justice reforms, things like decriminalizing cannabis.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's like this contradiction that we need to look at a bit more closely. Because on one hand, he's for this tough-on-crime approach, but then there's this other side where he supports reforms that a lot of people would consider progressive.
Exactly. And it really makes you wonder what the core principles are that are actually driving his decisions. Another big area for Gaetz is his criticism of big tech.
Oh, yeah. He's been very vocal about that, worried about censorship and what he sees as political bias on these platforms. He really thinks these companies have way too much power and need to be held accountable for how they influence public discussion.
And that's a message that's resonated with a lot of people who feel like their voices are being silenced. It's also put him right in line with this larger movement within conservative circles, the whole idea that big tech is a real threat to free speech.
Okay, so now we can't really talk about Matt Gaetz without addressing well, I guess you could say the elephant in the room, all these controversies that have followed him throughout his career.
Yeah, and these aren't just, side notes. They're really key to understanding his whole trajectory. And definitely the implications of him potentially becoming Attorney General.
Right. And I think the biggest one has to be that federal investigation from 2021 looking into potential sex trafficking violations.
Yeah, and even though no charges were filed, that investigation definitely did some damage to his reputation. It raised serious questions about his judgment.
And then there's the House Ethics Committee investigation, also for 2021. They were looking into allegations of sexual misconduct and misuse of funds.
Yeah.
But we still don't know what happened with that.
No, the status of that investigation is still unclear. But honestly, no matter what the outcome is, those allegations have already contributed to this idea of Gaetz, this image of him as someone who doesn't really care about ethical conduct. And then you have his association with Joel Greenberg, that former Florida tax collector who was actually convicted of sex trafficking. That just adds fuel to the fire,
Exactly. Gaetz wasn't implicated in that case, but still, being connected to Greenberg like that raises questions about his judgment, the company he keeps, especially for someone who wants to be the top law enforcement officer in the country.
It's a valid concern. And then you have his appearances at those events, the ones with connections to far-right groups. That's drawn a lot of criticism. Whether he meant for those associations to happen or not, they've made people question if he's really committed to, equality and justice for everyone.
And we can't forget about his very public criticism of the FBI and the Department of Justice. I mean, that's huge now, considering he's been nominated to be Attorney General.
Yeah, and critics are worried that his existing opinions, his criticisms of those very agencies, could create some serious conflicts of interest if he were to be in charge of them. Whether it's real or just perceived, that bias could really damage public trust in the Justice Department.
So let's talk about that nomination for Attorney General. When Trump nominated Gaetz in November 2024, It set off this immediate, very heated debate. I mean, people were arguing about it everywhere. Supporters see him as this reformer who's going to challenge the deep state.
But a lot of critics, like legal experts, civil rights groups, they're extremely worried about his lack of experience, and of course those ongoing investigations, and the fact that, given his history, he might not be able to be impartial.
His supporters love that he's this fearless outsider. They think he'll come in and shake up the system. They say that not having prosecutorial experience is actually a good thing. He'll bring a fresh perspective.
But for his detractors, the idea of someone with his background and, let's be honest, limited legal experience leading the Department of Justice, I mean, to them, that's just unacceptable. They keep pointing out how important the role of the Attorney General is, upholding the law, making sure justice is applied fairly.
Okay, so let's break down exactly how important the Attorney General's role is, especially in light of Gaetz's nomination.
So the Attorney General heads up the entire Department of Justice. They're basically the chief law enforcement officer for the entire federal government. It's a position that requires someone with a very high level of integrity, someone who's impartial, and, of course, has a ton of legal expertise. The Attorney General oversees all the federal prosecutors, represents the U.S. in legal matters, and advises the president on legal issues.
So yeah, given all of that, it's understandable why Gaetz's nomination is making people nervous. His critics worry that he might use the Department of Justice to go after his enemies, personal or political, instead of focusing on upholding the law fairly. They point to how he uses inflammatory language and how he always attacks people who disagree with him.
And his supporters think he'll use that same, I guess you could say, passion to root out corruption and make sure people in power are held accountable. They see him as someone who fights for the everyday person and will restore faith in the justice system.
That brings us to, I think, the core of all of this, the huge political divide that this nomination has revealed.
It's like Gaetz's nomination has become this lightning rod. It shows just how deeply divided American society is. It's a mini version of all these bigger battles going on, about the role of government, what justice really means, and even how we define truth.
We're going to explore these divisions even more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll also look at how Gaetz's story reflects what's going on in American politics right now.
It's like we were saying, Gaetz's nomination has become this, this stand-in for this much bigger argument about what the Justice Department should even be doing in America.
Right. Like, on the one hand, you have this group that thinks the DOJ has become way too, stuck in its ways, too bureaucratic, not really listening to what people want.
And they see Gaetz as someone who can come in and just, shake things up completely, like challenge how things have always been done.
His supporters use that term, deep state, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this secret group of unelected officials trying to sabotage the elected president.
Yeah, they really think Gaetz is on their side, that he'll fight against this supposed deep state and make the government accountable to, the people.
But then you have the other side. They're the ones who think the DOJ should be independent, like a referee for the law. That's their main job.
And to them, nominating Gaetz is like, well, it's dangerous. It's like saying the DOJ could be used for political reasons, to go after opponents,
And they're worried about what it'll do to people's trust in the justice system. Like, will people still think it's fair?
Exactly. And it's not just that he doesn't have the experience,
Just
right?
everything, right?
Yeah, all the stuff he said, how he attacks people who don't agree with him, those extremist figures he hangs out with, it all makes people uneasy about him being Attorney General.
It's like two completely different ways of seeing things, different values, different ideas about what the justice system should be.
And we're going to see that clash play out big time when the Senate starts the confirmation process.
Oh, yeah. Those hearings are going to be intense. Senators are going to grill him about everything, his controversies, his qualifications, what he wants to do with the DOJ if he gets the job.
And his supporters will be right there with him, saying he's the victim, that he's being attacked for trying to stand up for the people.
And his opponents will be saying he doesn't have the judgment, the temperament, that he shouldn't be in charge of something so important.
It's going to be fascinating to watch, but also kind of, scary.
It's a big deal. Whatever happens will affect Gaetz, obviously, but also the whole legal system.
Definitely. So, okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about what the public thinks of Matt Gaetz.
Well, he's definitely a polarizing figure, like we've been saying, and that's clear when you look at the polls.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge split, mostly along party lines.
Among Republicans, especially those who consider themselves part of the Matt Gaetz movement, he's very popular.
They think he's a strong leader, that he's brave, not afraid to say what he thinks and fight for it.
They like that he's always been loyal to President Trump and that he's willing to, take on what they see as a corrupt system.
But then you talk to Democrats and even some Republicans who are more moderate, and they're very skeptical of him. They don't trust him.
To them, he's reckless, irresponsible, even dangerous. They think he only cares about himself and getting ahead in politics.
They point to all those controversies, the things he said, who he associates with, and say it proves he shouldn't be in office.
And that same divide is there with his nomination, too. Republicans mostly support it. Democrats are totally against it.
It's become another one of those battles in the culture wars, making the country even more divided.
And that makes it hard to even talk about Gaetz and whether he's qualified, without getting into partisan arguments.
Yeah, people have their minds made up already. Their political beliefs are shaping how they see everything, the whole situation.
It's really a sign of how divided we are and how those divisions are affecting even the biggest decisions about who leads our institutions.
It really shows you how divided the country is. These divisions are even affecting, who we choose to lead our institutions.
And that makes it tough to look at Gaetz's nomination fairly without letting those biases get in the way.
Yeah, and what's worrying is, what if the DOJ starts being seen as a tool for one party? Not for everyone.
The DOJ is supposed to be trusted, people need to believe it's fair, and doesn't play favorites.
If people lose that trust, it could be really bad for the rule of law, even for our democracy.
When you look at Gaetz's story, it really reflects the crazy political times we're in.
Absolutely. It's all there, the rise of populism, the fact that traditional rules don't seem to matter as much anymore, and how social media controls so much of what we talk about.
And it makes us think, right? About what we should expect from our leaders. What kind of behavior is okay?
These are questions we all have to think about as we decide what we think about Matt Gaetz and where he fits in.
We want you to keep following this story, but do it with a critical eye. Don't just accept everything you hear.
Get different perspectives, challenge what you think you know, talk to people who disagree with you.
Our democracy needs people who are informed and involved, people who can figure out these complicated issues.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the career and controversies of Matt Gaetz.
We hope you have a better understanding of him, who he is, and how his story fits into the bigger political picture.
Remember, learning is a never-ending process. Keep searching for information, keep asking questions, and let's all keep working towards a society that's fairer for everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.